Hey everyone, welcome back. I think today's deep dive is going to resonate with a lot of you out there. We're going to dig into this whole startup paradox thing.
Ah, yes, the paradox. I see what you did there.
Needing a team, a product, customers,
Yeah.
oh, and funding all at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, where do you even begin? Thankfully, we've got Jeff Nelson's roadmap to guide us, his book, Hacking the Startup Paradox. It's full of these really practical strategies.
And it's not just theory. He's actually lived it, co-founding companies like Blavity and Afrotech.
Right. So let's jump right in. One of the biggest hurdles I hear from aspiring founders is, building that initial team, especially without a ton of cash to throw around.
Yeah, it's that classic catch-22. But Nelson argues that you can attract talent even with a shoestring budget.
Okay, so how do you do that? Spill the secret sauce.
Well, one often overlooked strategy is bringing on co-founders.
Okay, but we're not just talking about any co-founder, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need that strategic fit.
Precisely. It's not just about splitting equity, it's about finding people whose skills complement yours. Think of it like assembling a superhero team.
I love that analogy. So if I'm, say, a tech whiz, I might want to team up with someone who's amazing at marketing.
Exactly. And Nelson actually did this himself. He knew his strength was in tech, so he sought out co-founders with expertise in areas like marketing and operations. They created this team where their strengths were different but worked together,
It's like they had all the bases covered. But finding the right co-founder, that's got to be tough. It's a big decision.
Absolutely. And Nelson stresses the importance of having clear legal agreements in place from the get-go. Ownership percentages, roles, responsibilities, even exit strategies, all that stuff.
Makes sense. You're essentially entering into a business marriage. Protect yourselves and the business. So, co-founders, check. But what about those first few hires? It's not always feasible to offer big salaries early on.
Right. So Nelson proposes this really interesting idea, revenue sharing.
Revenue sharing. So instead of paying traditional salaries, early employees get a percentage of the company's income.
You got it. It ties everyone's compensation directly to the company's success.
That's a pretty sweet deal, at least early on. But is that sustainable long term?
Well, Nelson recommends limiting it, like maybe 12 months max. Then, as your startup gains traction and revenue becomes more consistent,
You can transition to those more traditional salary
I was
structures.
precise.
Okay, that's super interesting. It's like a win-win, at least for a while. But I'm gonna get real for a sec. Not every early stage company has the budget, even for revenue sharing. What about building a team with like zero budget?
Now you're talking true bootstrapping. And Nelson has some ideas for this too. One avenue he highlights, partnering with colleges.
Colleges, like working with students.
Exactly. Think internships. You get much needed help, and they gain real-world experience.
It's mutually beneficial. And those interns could turn into future hires down the line.
Exactly. Nelson also suggests exploring research collaborations. Imagine tapping into universities' specialized talent pools.
And maybe even getting access to some of that sweet, sweet research funding.
You're catching on. Of course, with any collaboration, especially with universities, clear intellectual property agreements are key. But the potential is huge.
Okay, so we've got co-founders, revenue sharing, tapping into academia. Anything else up Nelson's sleeve for building a team on a tight budget?
One word. Barter.
Barter, like trading service.
You got it. Skills are currency too.
So if I'm, say, a designer, I could trade design work for some development help on my app.
Exactly. There are even platforms like BarterChain that connect people for these types of swaps. It's a fantastic way to get what you need without spending a dime.
This is amazing. So even with limited funds, building a dream team is possible, but a team's only as good as the product they build. And that, my friends, brings us to our next challenge. How to actually build something when you don't have a whole engineering department at your disposal.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Nelson has some seriously ingenious strategies for that, even if you don't know the first thing about coding. But we'll save those for after the break. So you've got this awesome team raring to go. Now comes the really fun part, actually building the product. But let's be real, the thought of creating like a tech product, especially if you're not a techie, it can be kind of overwhelming, right?
Oh, totally. You start thinking about coding and needing a team of developers, and it can feel impossible, especially when you're starting out with limited resources.
Yeah, and Nelson gets that. He really wants to bust those myths about needing to be a coding whiz or having a ton of funding to create something great.
Okay, so how do you actually build a product if you don't have a tech background and a huge budget? What's the secret?
Well, it's about shifting your perspective a little bit. Instead of getting caught up in all the bells and whistles, thinking you need this perfect, super complex product right from the get-go, focus on the problem you're trying to solve.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Focus on the core value.
Exactly. It's about proving your idea, showing that it has legs, before you go all in on building something that people might not even want.
Makes sense. So what are some of those, like, practical hacks that Nelson suggests for getting a basic version of your product up and running? Especially if you're, like me, not exactly a tech wizard.
One surprisingly simple approach is to use automation. And before you say it, no, you don't need to be a tech genius to do this.
Okay, because coding is definitely not my forte.
You and me both. But think about all those software tools you probably already use. Email, spreadsheets, maybe a project management app, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I live in those tools.
Right. Well, platforms like Zapier or Make, they let you connect these everyday tools and automate tasks or workflows. So you're essentially creating a basic version of your product without any coding.
Hold on, I need an example. This is getting a little abstract for me.
Okay, so think about Groupon, the billion-dollar company.
Yeah, of course. Who doesn't love a good deal?
Right. Well, they actually started by manually emailing PDFs to people.
Wait, really? PDFs? That's it?
That's it. They used a simple WordPress sign-up form, created those coupon PDFs, and emailed them out. It wasn't fancy, but it proved their concept. They were solving a problem for people.
Wow, that's amazing. You don't always need all the bells and whistles from day one.
Exactly. It's about finding those scrappy solutions, and then as your startup grows, those simple automations can grow with you.
Okay, automation, check. But what about actually building, like an app, for example?
Yes. For that, Nelson is all about no-code development.
No code. You mean I can build an app without, the coding part?
You got it. There are all these platforms that let you create things visually. Think drag and drop interfaces, pre-built components.
Oh, that sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any specific platforms you recommend checking out?
Absolutely. For mobile apps, you could look into Adalo or Thunkable. For web apps, Builder and Bubble are great options. And these aren't just for hobby projects. There are some really successful companies that started with no code.
Like who? Spill tea.
Okay, so there's Teal, the AI-powered resume builder. They started with Bubble. And Play-Doh, an education platform, built their entire product using no code and even got into Y Combinator.
That's incredible. Okay, so no code is definitely a legitimate option, but are there any downsides?
The main thing is scalability. As your product gets bigger and more complex, you might eventually need to bring in more traditional coding to handle everything. But for those early stages, for testing the waters, no code is a game changer.
It's like a stepping stone, especially for non-technical founders.
Totally. And if you do hit a wall with no code, that's where the open source community comes in.
Okay, open source is where I usually get lost. Break it down for me.
Imagine a huge library full of code, all available for free. Instead of starting from scratch, you can find existing code that already solves a lot of common problems.
So it's like having a team of developers working for you, but without the whole, salary part.
Kind of. You do need to be careful about the licenses, making sure you can use the code commercially, and you might need to tweak it a bit to fit your needs.
Right, that makes sense. But how do you even find these open source projects? It seems like finding a needle in a haystack.
Platforms like GitHub and GitLab are great starting points. You can search by keywords related to what you're building.
So if I'm making a social media app, I could search for user authentication or something like that?
Exactly. And you can see how active the community is around a project, which can tell you a lot about its quality.
This is blowing my mind. There's so much out there that I had no idea about.
Right. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. There are tons of online communities where you can ask questions and get help from experienced developers.
Like having a built-in support system.
Exactly. And Nelson actually used this very strategy to build an entire platform for Afrotech.
Wow, if he can do it, maybe there's hope for me yet. Okay, so we've got automation, no code, open source. Anything else we can add to our product building toolkit?
Oh, there's one more game changer we have to talk about. Artificial intelligence, or AI for short.
AI. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating and maybe expensive for a bootstrapped startup.
I hear you, but AI is becoming way more accessible and affordable even for small businesses. And honestly, it's a game changer for product development.
Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Well, There are all these AI-powered design tools that can help you create amazing visuals and prototypes, even if you have zero design skills. Like tools like Figma and Adobe XD, they can literally generate wireframes from rough sketches, or even from what you tell them.
Wait, so I can be like, I want an app that looks like this, and the AI will just make it for me.
Well, it's not quite magic, but you can get a really solid starting point. And on the coding front, there are things like Replit that can translate what you want into actual code.
That's amazing. It feels like the future of building stuff.
It really is. AI is changing everything about how we create software. And it's not just design and coding.
Yeah.
AI can also help with things like writing documentation, testing your product, even analyzing user data, which are all super important.
So even without a big team of engineers, you can use AI to speed up the whole product development process.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder, and using these new tools to your advantage.
Okay, I have to admit, I was feeling a little intimidated about this whole build a product thing, but now I'm actually kind of excited to try some of these things out.
That's the spirit. Because now that we've got a handle on the product side, it's time to tackle the next big challenge, getting those early customers even before your product is officially launched.
And that is a whole other can of worms. But luckily for us, Nelson has some brilliant strategies for that too. All right, so we've got our team, we're building our product, even without needing to be coding wizards ourselves. Now, for the million-dollar question, or maybe I should say the multi-million-dollar question, how do we actually get customers?
The age-old challenge, right? And it feels even trickier when you're pre-revenue, maybe even pre-product.
Yeah, it's like you need customers to validate your idea, but you kind of need a product to attract those customers in the first place. It's a real head-scratcher.
Definitely a paradox, right? But Nelson flips the script a little here. He actually thinks getting customers before you have a fully fledged product can be the best validation.
Okay, now my brain's officially broken. How do you even start getting customers when you don't have something tangible to sell?
Well, get ready for this. He says start by selling yourself.
Hold on, selling myself. Like on eBay. I'm not sure I like where this is going.
Not quite. It's about leveraging what you already know, your expertise, and becoming a consultant.
Oh, okay, I'm starting to see it. So instead of pouring all my energy into building that perfect scheduling app right away, I could use my, I don't know, organizational skills to help clients with their time management issues, learn what works, and use that to shape my product.
You're getting it. It's generating revenue, gaining real-world insights, and testing your product's potential all at the same time.
It's like hitting 3 birds with 1 stone. And this isn't just some theoretical idea, right? Nelson actually did this himself.
Oh yeah, definitely not just theory. When he was building Shopee, he offered his data engineering skills as a service, and he landed some seriously big clients, even before his product was fully developed.
Wow, that's walking the walk for sure. But how do you even find these consulting clients? Is there like a secret handshake or something?
Not a secret handshake, but there are tons of platforms for that. You've got LinkedIn Services Marketplace, TopTal, Catalent, and don't forget about those corp-to-corp type listings on job boards.
So I'm basically hiring out my product before it exists. That's pretty clever.
It is. And beyond one-on-one consulting, don't underestimate the power of thought leadership to attract those early adopters.
Right, like sharing my expertise through blog posts, articles, creating content, that kind of thing.
Exactly. People are more likely to trust someone who seems like an expert, right?
Makes sense. Build that credibility. Show them you know your stuff.
And creating things like online courses can even generate some passive income while you're still building your main product.
Oh, there's that multiple income streams thing everyone's always talking about.
Exactly. It's a win-win. But honestly, attracting customers is about more than just those first few sales. It's about building a community.
Oh, that's so important. A community of people who are passionate about the same things you are.
Right. And Nelson talks about this a lot. Create a space, online or offline, where people can connect, share their pain points, discuss potential solutions.
It's like market research in action.
Exactly. And there are even platforms that can help you build and manage these communities, like Discourse or Circle.
This is amazing. Okay, so we've covered finding customers, but what about funding? How do you convince investors to back a startup that's pre-revenue, pre-product, maybe even pre-team? That's got to be the ultimate challenge.
It can definitely feel like that. There's so much emphasis on venture capital, but that's not the only path, especially early on.
Yeah, it can feel pretty intimidating, especially if you don't have those connections.
Right. So Nelson dives into alternative funding sources in his book. And one of the most practical pieces of advice, and maybe the most surprising, is to think about keeping your day job, at least for a while.
Wait, really? Keep your day job? I thought the whole point of being an entrepreneur was to, quit your job and dive in head first.
I know it seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But it can actually give you more freedom in the long run. It takes some of the pressure off, allows you to be more strategic.
Like having that safety net while you're still figuring things out.
Exactly. And if and when you are ready to go all in, there are options beyond traditional VC funding. Crowdfunding, for example, has become huge.
Oh yeah, crowdfunding. Seems like everyone is launching a Kickstarter these days.
Right. And there are different ways to approach it. You can offer equity, borrow money, even offer rewards to your backers. It depends on what you're building.
So instead of needing a few big investors, you're tapping into a larger pool of people who believe in your idea.
Exactly. And platforms like Start Engine and Kickstarter make it pretty accessible.
Okay, so crowdfunding, that's good to know. Anything else?
Have you ever heard of becoming an entrepreneur in residence, or EIR?
EIR. That sounds interesting, but no, tell me more.
So it's like getting paid to be a founder. Venture capital firms, universities, even big companies, they host these programs where they give entrepreneurs resources, mentorship, even funding to help them develop their businesses.
Wow, so you have this built-in support system. That sounds pretty amazing.
It can be. It's not for everyone, though. These programs are competitive and often come with specific expectations or obligations.
Right, so do your research, make sure it's a good fit. What else is out there?
Don't forget about grants, both government and private. It can be a bit of a process to apply, but if you can snag one of those, that's non-dilutive funding, which is huge. And then there are pitch competitions, those innovation challenges.
Like Shark Tank for startups.
Exactly. They can be a fantastic way to gain exposure, make connections, and maybe even win some funding.
This is all so inspiring. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of all the great advice in Nelson's book. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just that building a successful startup, it's not about following some rigid formula. It's about being resourceful, adaptable, and never giving up on your vision.
It's about embracing those challenges, finding creative solutions, and really truly owning your journey.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the world of startups. We hope you're feeling inspired to tackle those entrepreneurial dreams. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep hacking those paradoxes.